you can.
There is a disconnected and electricity disconnected. Pandya sir.
सोलंकी साहब,
जी सर
सर का शायद आवाज ब्रेक हो रहा है। आई होप
नहीं यो ऐसा है सर, अभी यहाँ पे इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कट ऑफ है तो सर रीजन हो रहे हैं पंड्या।
Yes, again. So I was saying that to write 75 research papers and to be a member of various BIS committees is not an easy task. So Brijesh, we are very proud of you that you have gone through this journey on your own, and we are also proud that you are our alumni. Today's his talk is about non-destructive testing on reinforced concrete. So it is very much beneficial to final year and pre-final year students, as final year students have already learned this subject, and pre-final year students are having this subject concrete technology in their syllabus right now. So I hope that we will be students will be benefited through this talk, and let us hear to principal sir. Please, principal sir, if you say a few words of encouragement to us, please, sir.
Yes, very good morning to everyone, and a very special welcome to Brijesh.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Yeah, very good morning, and very happy to have you for this event here today. So, as Professor Pandya introduced and said the things about you, it's very clear that you are one of the very bright alumni of this institute, and always institute and the teachers are proud of such alumni who are not only making college proud, but at the same time serving the society at their best, and that is something which is absolutely encouraging to these students who are attending this webinar today. The area that you have chosen is wonderful, non-destructive testing, and as we know that NDT is always something which is very much useful and crucial as far as the resource saving is concerned in all field of engineering, whether it is civil or mechanical or production or anything. So I'm very sure that the inputs that you will be sharing with the students and faculty members today will be of ultimate benefit to them. Your work and your contribution is evident from your standing, and it will come through your sharing of the information and knowledge also. So I wish very success to this program. At the same time, I would like to congratulate to the Department of Applied Mechanics for arranging such event, and I'm absolutely proud of Brijesh as well as this other alumni of this institute who are making this college proud. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, respected principal sir, and thank you, Professor Rapesh Pandya sir. Now, I will not take much more time, and over to you, Brijesh sir. Please start the session. Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Professor Solanki. I hope now my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible, and you're perfectly audible.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Professor Bhatt, Professor Trivedi, Professor Pandya, and Professor Solanki. It gives me a great proud to have a talk on this topic in my college, which I am very proud of. And I am specifically thankful to Professor Pandya and Professor Solanki, who have made it possible to carry out this talk in front of all of you. So today I will be talking on non-destructive testing techniques for evaluation of reinforced concrete structures. And this is one of the very important field, basically with respect to construction. Apart from that, when we go for any repair and rehabilitation, these non-destructive techniques are very, very important in order to finalize the repair methods. Because if you are aware of the problem, then only we will be able to carry out a appropriate repair and rehabilitation. So assessment of any reinforced concrete structures, be it a new construction or a old constructions where the structure has undergone some distress, it requires some specific method. And if you see the approach starts from a visual observations itself. So whenever we see any structure, many times by the look of it, we can judge what is the problem. For example, if you see some kind of spelling, some kind of cracking, you get a starting idea that what could be a reason. But again, we go for tests in order to confirm the problem, and those tests includes field test and laboratory tests. So this non-destructive testing comes under the field test, but many times even after doing non-destructive tests, we are not 100% sure about the problem. Then in that cases, we go for laboratory tests also. So those laboratory tests basically are dealing with the cement content, chemical analysis of concrete samples, like what is the chloride, what is the sulfate level in your hardened concrete. Apart from that, what is the microstructural changes in your concrete? For that, we have a different kind of equipments like scanning electron microscopy, X-ray diffraction. So those tests are also required when we go for assessment of any concrete structures. And last one, if you see on the right screen, it is a study of records and questioning. This is important, specifically in case of old structures where we may not have a sufficient information about the structure. Like many times, we don't have a data regarding what is the grade of concrete used in the structure, what was the mixed design detail for that project, what is the structural drawing of that project. So many times it is not available. So many times if some persons are available, we ask them and we try to take maximum information from them. And second case is that if there is some collapse in the structure, some failure in the structures, so people involved in the constructions can give you a certain idea which will be useful in your assessment. So after going through all this, we try to find out the cause and extent of damage, that whether the damage is under the mild category or a moderate category, or it is under the severe category. And depending upon that, we take a judgment that whether we should go for repair, whether we should go for dismantling, or whether we should go for some kind of retrofitting. So this whole step is very important. So assessment of any concrete structures are aimed at finding out the visual features. These visual features are basically cracking, what is a kind of distress, deflections, etc. in the structure, which many times are visible and many times it is not visible. Then we try to find out what is the in-place strength. So when we talk about the in-place strength, so we are talking about what is the compressive strength of concrete, what is the tensile strength of concrete, because this assessment varies from structure to structure. If we are going to have an investigation of building, then we are mostly talking about the compressive strength. But if we are talking about some mass concrete structures like dams, so there we need to find out other properties like tensile strength, what is its modulus of elasticity, what is its shrinkage parameters, because those are very, very important in order to carry out the assessment. whatever data we get, many times we use that data to recheck the structural design and then go for the repair and rehabilitation. So a strength or a mechanical parameters, which we generally call, is very, very important. Then third part of the investigation comes in terms of internal conditions. What is the internal conditions of concrete? Whether there is some kind of voids, whether there is honeycombing, because these voids, honeycombing can come from construction errors, which is coming from improper compaction or some kind of heavy congestion of reinforcement, or with respect to the improper mixed design, workability related issues, etc. So those can be done by finding out what is the voids, what is the honeycombing inside your concrete. Then if you talk about pre-stressing concrete, so there the voids in tendon ducts becomes very, very important. Whenever we go for post-tensioning, so we have a ducts and we do this stressing, but when we fill with the material, there is always a possibility of some kind of voids. So if we want to investigate that whether our voids are not there and it is properly compacted, so non-destructive testing will be a helpful tool. Then voids below slab on ground, there is also some possibilities in some cases that there can be a voids which will be existing below the slab. Then some kind of issues with respect to the member thickness and delaminations. So delaminations basically is a kind of separations which happens between the two layers of concrete. So that can also be assessed using these non-destructive tools. And last one, but most important, which we generally find throughout our country, is the corrosion of reinforcement. All of you, while in your college, will be studying that we design a structure for 50 years, 75 years, or 100 years, depending upon the importance of your structure. So construction should be in such a way that the structure should fulfill its desired service life. And for that to happen, a corrosion of reinforcement should not happen in the structure. So we should also talk that how we can avoid the corrosion and how to assess the corrosion. Because once you assess, then only you can define your correct repair method. Now, this is just an example. If you see this slab, this is a typically corroded reinforcement in RC slab. So if we go for inspection of such sites, by the look of it, we can find out that the reinforcement has almost corroded. There is a spalling happening. Now, this photograph is basically a picture taken from Parliament House of India. So here you don't have to conduct more tests only because everything is visible. But question comes, why this has happened? So for that, you need to also take care of your laboratory test methods. You have to find out what is the chloride content in the concrete, what is the sulfate content in the concrete, and how this has happened. So this was investigated by us, and when we have done the investigation of this structure, we found that the Parliament canteen is just on the top of this slab, and over a period of time, there was a seepage of water inside the slab. But since this is more than 85 to 90 years old structure, it is almost fulfilled its service life. So due to the seepage of water, the reinforcement has undergone corrosion. In the coming slides, I will be discussing in detail how the corrosion happens. But just to give you a brief insight that because of seepage over a period of time, this slab has undergone corrosion. Even though the chloride was within the permissible limit, there was not much of issue of carbonation because it is the interior. So I will also be talking about what is the carbonation mechanism, what are the things which create corrosion in the concrete structures. So this was a typical situation where a person from a visual observation itself can say that this corrosion has happened due to seepage, because there was not other possibility which could be existing in this case. Once we have done the chemical test and we have found that all the chemical ingredients are within the permissible limit. So for these members, we have designed ISMB 300 and we have placed at a spacing of 1.5 meter center to center just to support this slab, because there we were not permitted to do any kind of damage or dismantling. So it was only to enhance the service life by some 15 years or 20 years. So here this slab was treated as a plain concrete. Since the reinforcement has completely gone, so ISMB sections in both the directions were there, kept to just hold this slab and make sure that this at least sustains for 15 to 20 years. You must be hearing in the news that the new parliament building construction is under the way. So that was the reason that the government decided to construct a new parliament building, because almost this has completed its service life. A second example is a case of a typically corroded reinforcement in RCC column. So again, from the visual observation itself, you can see that the reinforcement is undergoing some corrosion if you see it carefully. Apart from that, the longitudinal bars in the columns are not proper. Third thing, the stirrups, which are very, very important, or ties, which are very, very important from the earthquake point of view, is missing in these columns. Maybe it is at a very high spacing, due to which we are not able to see from this picture, but this indicates a poor quality construction. This structure was supposed to sustain for about 45 to 50 years, but somehow within a span of 8 to 10 years, the condition is like this, and because of this structure is now not in use. So it's a typical case of poor construction, poor detailing, and a poor quality control at site. Now, why I am showing this? Because once I will be talking about the non-destructive test methods, those tests are very, very easy to conduct. It's not very difficult. There is no rocket science in using those equipments. The challenge is how to do the interpretation of the data, how to club 2 or 3 tests together for a particular distress so that we are able to formulate a proper repair methods. Again, if you see in this case, there is a cracking along the reinforcement in RCC columns. So visually, if we see, we need to find out why this cracking is happening. But just to tell you, generally the cracking along the reinforcement indicates the cracking because of corrosion. Now, as I have told you, the understanding of failure and the distress mechanism is very, very important once you go for investigation of any RCC structure. So there are different kinds of cracks which are possible. It can be either a cracking in form of mesh pattern, or it can be cracking along the reinforcement. Now, a mesh pattern crack can be because of 3 reasons. One is the conventional drying shrinkage, second is the frost action, and third is the alkali aggregate reaction. Why this is important? Because on the basis of this understanding only, you will be able to select the equipments. What are the tests we need to carry? It's like when you are going to a doctor has to decide whether you have a problem in your stomach, or you have a problem in your brain, or problem is somewhere else. And depending upon that, he will ask you to conduct certain tests. So understanding the problem is very important in any non-destructive test methods related assessment. So shrinkage, frost action, and alkali aggregate reaction. Now we need to understand in what kind of structures there is a possibility of frost action. Take example, if any structure is situated in Gujarat, or it is in Delhi, or it is in Rajasthan, you will agree that there is not a possibility of a frost action. Frost action will not be happening there. But if the same structure is somewhere in the Himalayan region, in Jammu Kashmir or Leh Ladakh, so there the problem can be a frost action. So my structure is not there, it is in Delhi or Gujarat or Rajasthan, I should not be worrying about frost action. If it's a case of a slab or it's a road, then there can be a possibility of shrinkage related cracks. But third one, alkali aggregate reaction. This generally happens in mass concrete. When I talk about the mass concrete, it generally you will find in case of dams, that is the concrete gravity dams, or you can find in case of TG foundations, in case of power plants. So there, if your structure is in contact with moisture, like the classic case is a dam, where your structure is on the upstream side is in contact with water. So there can be a possibility of alkali aggregate reaction. What is alkali aggregate reaction? When aggregate contains harmful minerals like opal, chert, chalcodony. There are different kinds of harmful minerals which can be present in the aggregate and which over a period of time can form a salt in form of sodium and potassium. And those salts can create a mesh pattern like cracking during the service of a structure, specifically when your structure is in contact with moisture. That is why nowadays all the dams which are constructed in our country, before their construction, aggregates are evaluated and they are examined for their expansion, that whether they are expensive in nature or not. If they are expensive in nature, many times it is not used. Why I have used the word many times? Because sometimes we don't have an option. For example, if I am doing some construction in a Himalayan region, some dam is going on, there we many times find out that there is no alternate source of aggregate. But somehow there is an expansion which is more than the permissible limit which is given in the code. So there a selection of cement becomes very important. Nowadays there is a variety of cements existing in your country. It starts from a conventional Portland cement to Portland Pozzolana cement, Portland slag cement, and there is a composite cement which is also going to be popular very soon. So selection of cements can also prohibit this alkali aggregate reaction. Today I will be not talking much in detail about that. There are methods to control these problems. But we should be aware that if my structure is not in contact with any moisture, it's not a mass concrete, it's a normal building or it's a kind of a normal industrial structure, the possibility of alkali aggregate reaction is not there. But somehow if I am going to have an investigation of some dam, like we have done the investigation of Bhakra Dam. So in my test list, alkali aggregate reactivity tests should be carried out. Then coming to the cracking along the reinforcement. If in normal buildings or bridges, if you see any cracks which is along the reinforcement, it basically gives you an idea that there may be some corrosion activity taking place. So these cracking patterns are very, very important, and therefore a visual observation is an important tool. So coming to the tools, as I have now discussed in detail about the visual inspection, which basically comes from your knowledge, experience over a period of time. Then we go for some extraction of samples. Those samples can be used for determining the compressive strength, where we take concrete cores. That same concrete cores or cores can be taken to determine the other mechanical properties like modulus of elasticity, Poisson's ratio, split tensile strength, shrinkage parameters, etc. Many times in case of dams, creep is also important. So we conduct the creeps also on the samples extracted from the structure. Then the second part is a petrographic analysis. Why this is important? That if some kind of alkali aggregate reaction is happening or some kind of sulfate related activity is happening, from petrographic we find out what is the mineralogical composition of your aggregates used in the construction. Like if you see our IS 456, there is an Indian Standard 456-2000 which talks about the different types of aggregate. There is a table where our aggregates are divided into 5 categories like granite, quartzite, sandstone, limestone, and basalt. Again, each of the aggregates have a different mineralogical compositions. So we need to be careful, particularly when we go for a microstructural investigations in case of mass concrete structures. Because there, if alkali silica reaction or alkali carbonate reactions, if such reactions happens, then it is very difficult to conduct a repair. Then third is an in-place test for uniformity and strength, that whether my concrete is properly compacted, there is no honeycombing. So for that, there are equipments which we'll be talking in the coming slides. Advanced NDT techniques. Nowadays, there is advanced NDT techniques also have come, which are on the various principles like stress wave methods and corrosion evaluation methods. And the principles of NDT methods, particularly for flaw detection. Flaw means some cracks, some voids, some deflections. Those are on the basis of continuous interactions, which is the interaction between your internal discontinuities and other processes. And therefore, the basic principle for many equipments, if you talk, is on the stress wave propagation technique or electromagnetic wave propagation techniques, which I will be explaining you with respect to your different equipments. Just before we go into the type of equipments, these properties are very, very important in order to understand what is the different kinds of propagation mechanisms which takes place. There are a stress wave propagation method where we go for a properties pertaining to elastic constants and density. Then we have a thermal conductivity, dielectric constant and density. And there are different methods like infrared thermography. There are ground penetrating radar, which is mostly used in case of tunnels to check its thickness or to see if there is any kind of delamination, and gamma and X radiography, which is not quite common in our country currently. But if you talk about international level, gamma and X radiography techniques are also quite common. So what is the stress wave method? Stress wave method, we do a generation of impact. And these stress waves are easy to generate by a mechanical impact or some kind of transducers. So these transducers or mechanical impacts create some kind of stress waves. And these stress waves are sent through the concrete section, and travel speed of these waves are very, very important because it is interlinked with your density of concrete. So travel speed is always depending on your elastic constants as well as density of concrete. Now, third important thing is to note here is that whenever the stress waves are passing through any concrete air interface, it gets reflected. The meaning is that if there is any kind of cracks, any kind of voids or honeycombing, that means there is some kind of air present in the void. Then if it is a bigger one or the crack is bigger one, your stress waves will get reflected. How it is going to be useful, we will see in the coming slides. So monitoring of internal stresses will give you the location of defects and thicknesses. So this is just a basic principles behind all these equipments. Stress wave, we know there is a particle motion, and we have a different kind of waves which generally exist, like P wave, S wave and R wave. So these waves have a different contribution like 10%, 25%, 65%. But again, this is the theory part. So we will mostly talk now on the practical aspects, how to investigate the structures. P waves basically are associated with normal stresses, which is creating a parallel movement. S waves are associated with shear stresses, and R wave is a combination of both. And for any good quality concrete, generally we classify the quality in terms of velocity, and that velocity generally we expect to be around 3.5 to 4 km per second. Again, there are different reflection coefficients for different material. Why? This is important because if you can see these values, take an example of concrete air. So there the reflection coefficient is 1. That means if there is a concrete air interface, the reflection will be of 100%. If it's a concrete water, then it is 0.72, minus 0.72. If it is a concrete steel, it is 0.68. So all these equipments are depending upon the densities, P wave speeds and acoustic impedance of different materials. Though civil engineers will not be going so much into detail, but just to give you an insight, this is how the things needs to be correlated when you are going to determine the flaws in your members. So density, speed of P wave and acoustic impedance are very, very important, because on the basis of that parameters only and the reflection coefficient also, your overall velocity values will be depending. So any concrete, if you talk, it's a two-phase model. It consists of aggregate and paste. So why I am showing this, that only paste properties changes with hydration. There is not change in aggregate with respect to any volume or any kind of shrinkage. but the things which will have a change in its property will be your paste with respect to your hydration. So this was some kind of basics with respect to your stress related methods, stress wave related methods. Now we will start from the first equipment, which is an ultrasonic pulse velocity test. So this equipment is used to check the quality of concrete. So when we talk about the quality of concrete, it talks about the compaction, density, homogeneity, uniformity all together in terms of velocity of your concrete. So there are standards available, like we have our own Indian standard. Earlier it was IS 1399 part 1, IS 1392 I think part 1 and part 2 for UPV and rebound hammer. But we have a new standard which is recently developed in year 2020, that is IS 516 part 5. So there are some changes which I will be talking, that what changes has undergone this IS 516 part 5, and there is an international standard, that is ASTM-C 597. So in this, what we do, we place a transducers on both the opposite faces of your concrete member. Example, if it is a column, we place a transducer on one opposite face and then on the other opposite face, and we call it as transmitter and receiver, and we pass the ultrasonic waves through your concrete. And when we pass these ultrasonic waves, we try to calculate what is the transit time. So transit time from one end to another end is calculated, and we know the path length. For example, if your column size is 300 mm, so path length or a member size divided by your travel time will give you a velocity. So we calculate the velocity. So we have a different methods to conduct this test in terms of testing arrangement, like whether both the opposite faces are available or not, whether the side faces are only available or whether only surface is available. If it's a case of a slab where you can say a raft foundation or some kind of CC pavement or some kind of drain top slab, many times we have only one surface available for testing, then we go for surface probing. If we have both faces available, particularly like columns, bridge piers, etc., retaining walls, then we go for direct transmission. Many times we have only a side faces available, we go for semi-direct. And you can see here that we keep a transducer in this manner in case of semi-direct transmission, and we try to pass the ultrasonic waves and calculate the transit time. But surface probing is a least reliable method because your waves will be not traveling throughout your member cross section. It will be only traveling in a parabolic manner in an upper part. So it is a least accurate, and if you see the code, it states that there can be a variation of plus minus 1 kilometer per second in case of surface probing. So it is for advanced users. The meaning of advanced users is that the people who are constantly using this equipment over a period of time, they get experience, and based on that, they are aware about the pros and cons of surface probing. How this works, if you see the typical example of this column, if your structure is solid or if your member is solid, it will pass in a straight way, the travel time will be less. So your velocity will be more. If you see this particular area, there is some kind of honeycombing. So once there is a honeycombing, it will not travel in a straight path, but it will try to find out the solid medium. It will not pass through a concrete air interface. So it will be like this, and your travel time will be more. Once your travel time is more, your velocity will decrease. If this is the case where there is some kind of internal crack, then it will be passing in a triangular way. So again here, your travel time is more. And if there is a bigger crack, a very wide crack, in that case, it will not pass through that crack and you will not get any signal. So if you are not getting any signal, it always doesn't mean that there is some problem with equipment. There can be a problem in a structure also. And how this test is conducted? To conduct this test, we prepare a grid at the interval of 300 mm center to center. So we have to plot a grid on your member, mark points at the spacing of 300 mm center to center. You have to place your transducers at each locations on both the faces. And then you need to calculate your velocity, and then you plot in terms of contours or histograms, etc. But this test method has some limitations. The first limitations is that it will not provide you any information about the depth. It is also sometimes confusing in our country. Many people think that UPV gives strength. See, UPV will never give you a strength, it only gives you a quality of concrete. Somehow, a strength and quality are interrelated. So once you need to correlate UPV in terms of strength, you need to use other tests in correlation with that, like your concrete core test or many times concrete cube strength data, in order to quantify or some kind of you can say an indirect relationship between the quality of concrete and strength. For this reason only, our code, if you see this particular slide, this is taken from latest Indian standard IS 516 part 5, that we have categorized this ultrasonic pulse velocity values in two categories. The first category is that for concrete less than or equal to M25 grade of concrete, this is the criteria. If your value is below 3.5, your concrete is under doubtful category. If it is 3.5 to 4.5, it is good. So good is acceptable. Above 4.5, a quality is excellent. For concrete greater than M25, below 3.75, doubtful. 3.75 to 4.5, good. And above 4.5, excellent. So if anything is coming in between your doubtful category, it indicates that there is some kind of voids, honeycombing or crack possibility inside your member. So for that, you need to carry out additional tests. It can be a concrete core test where we can drill a core at the location where we are getting the lower UPV values. So further investigation is recommended for values below 3.5 if your concrete is up to M25. If it is greater than M25, below 3.75 is a doubtful, so further investigation needs to be done. Now, there can be various factors which can affect a particular test. So a user should also understand what are those factors, like aggregate type, whether your aggregate is a limestone, basalt, sandstone, because a different aggregates has a different impact, abrasion values. Ultimately, aggregate also has its own density. So it will be affecting your pulse velocity. What is the quantity of aggregate? Because nowadays we have a different newer types of materials like ultra high strength concrete or ultra high performance concrete, where we simply don't use coarse aggregate. There we only use a fine aggregate or a cementitious materials of lower fine for higher fineness. So aggregate content also impacts your UPV value. Moisture content, if your concrete is saturated, your ultrasonic pulse velocity values will be different as compared to your dry concrete. So saturated concrete gives 5% greater pulse velocity as compared to your dry concrete. Then there can be an issue with respect to presence of reinforcement, and whether that reinforcement is in parallel direction or perpendicular direction is very important. If you are measuring your velocity in a concrete at a particular level, and if in the same level a reinforcement is coming, then all of you know that the density of steel is more than 3 times the density of concrete. So what will happen? We may be testing that particular steel part along with concrete, and we will be getting a higher velocity. So we need to be careful, and how to locate the reinforcement we will be talking in the coming slides. We have equipments, so we can cross check by using that particular equipment which is known as profometer or ferro scanner, that whether some reinforcement is coming in between or not. So all these 4 can have a significant impact on your pulse velocity. Now there are some testing considerations. Testing considerations are that whenever we conduct ultrasonic pulse velocity test, the surface should be smooth. It should not be rough. For example, if it is rough, there will be a proper contact. And if there is not a proper contact, there will be some loss of signal. So that is why we use a couplant, which is generally a viscous fluid, gel-like grease. So we use that and make sure that there is a proper contact. And we apply a pressure on that particular surface, and then we conduct a test. And for any equipment, the calibration is very important. So we have a reference bar where the values of our transit time is given, like 26.5 or 82.5, 72.5, depending upon the reference material which has been used in formulation of reference bar. So we have to do a calibration before conducting a test, or even if we are changing the wires, many times we need to change the transducers. If you see the code, we have a different frequency of transducers depending upon the member size. So we have a 82 kilohertz transducer, we have a 54 kilohertz transducer, we have a 24 kilohertz, so on. So different frequency transducers are recommended by the code depending upon the member size. So we need to refer the code, and accordingly we should select the different kinds of transducer suiting to our particular case. A 54 kilohertz transducer is generally a universal transducer. If you don't have any other options available in your lab, you can go for 54 kilohertz. That is many times called as universal transducer. So this UPV method is good for assessing uniformity and identifying the areas of further investigation if your UPV values are coming under the doubtful category. But a question comes, if I want to do the investigation of foundation, can I use UPV? No, because UPV have a certain limitations. UPV, if both the phases are available, then only it is accurate. As I have told you in the previous slides, that if we have only one phase available, like in case of foundation, then we have to go for surface probing, and we may not be able to do a justice with that foundation because the thickness of foundation can be even 1.5, 1. I'm talking about raft. There is other methods to assess the quality of pile foundation that also we'll be discussing. So some limitations are there for UPV when only one phase is available. Then we have an equipment called as surfer. So this surfer is somewhat in the similar principle to ultrasonic pulse velocity. Only difference is that here we have a dry point contact. So this is a dry point contact transducers, and it is designed for surface measurement of wave speed. So in a parabolic way, the waves will travel and it will give you a crack. Again, this equipment also has a limitation. This crack depth measurement is generally done in a cover concrete. So limitation is this can detect a depth of crack up to a 50 mm. So when I talk about 50 mm, this is basically useful to find out the crack in the cover concrete. So when we talk about the durability related issues, this crack in the cover concrete is important because from these locations only a moisture, carbon dioxide or other harmful ingredients can enter. So this is useful to find out the crack in the cover concrete. It's a very simple equipment. Just you have to place and press on the surface. Here you don't have to apply any grease or any couplant because it's a dry point contact. It's a simple equipment. Now coming to the different impact methods. As I have told you that UPV may not be useful when only one surface is available. So what to do? When only one surface is available, we have a different latest equipments which is on the principle of impact. So we have a impact echo, and second one is the impulse response. So impact echo is used for finding out voids, honeycombing, delaminations and thickness. And impulse response is again used for finding out honeycombing, delamination and voids. So we'll be discussing in detail both the equipments. Simple principle is that we give an impact. Here we have only one transducer which is called as receiver. We record the signal and then we do the analysis, which is basically a waveform analyzer through a computer system. This is little bit advanced and sophisticated. We need to have a more information related with the physics part of this. So first equipment now with respect to this is the impact echo method. So here the impact is used to generate a stress wave of short duration, which is generally less than 100 microseconds. And here what we do, our transducers are near to the location where we give an impact. So we give an impact and we try to receive a signal by using this displacement transducers. If I talk in terms of simplified frequency analysis, take an example of this particular member. So here what happens, if we give an impact at this location, if you see where I'm moving my pointer, this will travel and it will come back. So this has a more powerful capability. It can assess up to 1.5 meter depth, this impact echo method. We give an impact, we receive a signal. So here your travel time is twice. If you see this picture, from here it will go and come. So the delta T, which is your travel time, is 2 times your path length divided by the velocity of your concrete. So first of all, on a similar concrete, we need to conduct a test by using UPB, and from that we should first determine our velocity for that grade of concrete, for that particular material. If I am using a M25 grade, I should first generate a velocity data on the members, and then when conducting members where only one face is accessible, like foundation or some slabs, there we should use this, and we will be able to calculate the travel time. And it also gives a frequency. So frequency is basically 1 upon T. So by using the Fourier transform, you can easily calculate amplitude upon frequency. If you need to understand in terms of example, see, if your slab is solid, for example, this is a case, and the depth of the slab is 0.5 meter, we will give an impact and it will come back. So if it is of complete thickness, your amplitude versus frequency is this. So your frequency is in the range of 3.42 kilohertz. Take an example, if there is some kind of voids, some kind of delamination, some kind of separation in your concrete block or foundation, which is a light concrete block only. So once you give an impact, if there is some voids or major honeycombing, it will go and come back. So your travel time will be less. Once your travel time is less, your frequency will be more. So if your travel time is less than expected, why I am saying expected? Because you know this distance, it is 0.5 meter in this direction. When it will come back, it is again 0.5 meter. So this total distance is 1 meter. 1 meter divided by your velocity, which we have found out on some different member of same grade, we can calculate our expected transit time. If it is less, it indicates either there is a delamination or there is a problem with the thickness. So concrete pavements can also be checked using this equipment. That, for example, if it's a case of a national highway road, a thickness is 300 mm in a drawing, whether the similar thickness is throughout the length or not. So this any deviation in delta T, if your delta T, which is a transit time, is less, your frequency will be more. So higher frequency indicates some kind of issues. And once you see some issue, you can go for further investigation. So this equipment is a bit sophisticated, but it is very, very useful when you have only one phase available. An example of this impact echo, just I am giving one example here, is a tendon duct. So if your tendon duct is properly grouted, it will pass through and through and it will come. So your delta T will be less or it will be as expected. But if you have some voids, so it will not pass through void, it will pass through here. So you will have a shifted thickness peak. So it indicates there is some problem in your tendon duct. That means grouting is not proper. There is a possibility of void. So once you start using such equipments, you get experience. From that experience, you can find out flaws inside the member by doing any kind of destruction. That is why these all tests are treated as non-destructive tests. So its applications are in different areas: voids or honeycombing, delaminations, depth of surface opening cracks, voids in grouted tendon ducts, bond quality, etc. Some limitations are that it is dealing with the complexity of wave propagation. It's a point testing, so you need to conduct tests at more point in order to have a overall assessment. It takes time to evaluate test surface. So there are some limitations, but those limitations are taken care with experience. Now coming to the impulse response method. So impulse response method is even more powerful in terms of testing the deep foundations. Why I'm saying more powerful? That it has an even capability to test up to 50 meter depth. So UPB was generally about 1 meter, that too when both the faces are available. Impact echo, even if one surface is available, it is up to 1.5 to 2 meter. Now impulse response method can go up to 50 meters. So it is used to test deep foundations, requires measurement of impact force. It is on the principle of frequency domain method and lower frequency than impact echo. This is important. So 0 to 1 kilohertz is the range of that frequency. And this is how the equipment setup look like. First, you need to have a receiver. It's similar to impact echo. You need to give a impact by using the hammer, and this your waves will pass through this and it will come back. So principle is similar. If there is some kind of cracks or something like that, it will come back. If there is some bulging or necking, again those signals will be affected. So it's a case of soil structure interaction related, and there is a software where you can draw your pile profile in terms of response signal, and you can find out the depth of foundation, and depth of pile foundation is very important. For example, if it's a case of breeze, you are constructing a group of piles together, and if 1 or 2 pile is of short length, then there can be a possibility of differential settlement. So we always conduct this test on pile foundations at a different frequency in order to make sure that all the piles are of uniform length and all the piles are of uniform cross section. Because if your pile is having some necking, then it can create a problem. So equipment which is on the basis of this principle is called as pile integrity tester. So this pile integrity tester is based on pulse echo principle, as I have told you. So this is having a hammer. This is a receiver. We give an impact on the top of pile. This test should never be conducted on pile cap. So first of all, we need to conduct the test on pile head. It should not be done on pile cap. And top portion of the concrete pile should be maintained properly by removing the bentolite slurry so that we are able to transmit the waves properly. This equipment is useful to assess integrity of pile in terms of its length, its dimension, and overall quality of concrete pile. So this equipment is also supported with software which have a capability of creating a pile profile, and from that you can check the overall quality of your pile. So again, this is very important equipment. Now coming to a fourth equipment, which is a cover meter or rebar locator. So many times when we want to see what is the concrete cover or what is the spacing of reinforcement in your column, in your beams, in your slabs, we use a equipment called as cover meter. So aim of this is to find out cover to a reinforcement and to measure the spacing between the steel bars. There are different names for these equipments in market. It is called as cover meter, it is called as profometer, it is called as ferroscanner. So it is on the principle of electromagnetic waves. And why this concrete cover is important? This concrete cover is very important from the durability point of view. If you are not providing in your construction the optimum concrete cover, then your reinforcement will have a lesser protection. So that means the structure or your concrete member will have a chance to undergo corrosion at the early stage. Second thing, spacing. If somebody is doing construction, some issue has happened, and if somebody wants to go for investigation, this ferroscanner can give you reinforcement in both the directions. Apart from that, it will give you concrete cover. So reinforcement spacing and concrete covers gives you the information about the quality of construction. It gives you the workmanship of the construction. It gives the information about the durability issues which can happen in future. So this is very important equipment. But again, this equipment has a certain limitation, because if your congestion of reinforcement is there, nowadays we see a high amount of reinforcement, especially in case of high rise buildings or multi-story buildings. So if the gap between the two reinforcement is less than 60 mm, this equipment will not work. Or this equipment will not able to detect the reinforcement in second layer. First layer it can detect, but if in some member, if reinforcement is in 2 layers, then this theroscanner will not be able to detect. But for a normal buildings, it is very important to find out what is the number of bars. We will be able to draw, like you see here. We can plot this reinforcement in both the directions. We can find out a spacing of stirrups or ties. Now the ties spacings are very, very important. If you remember the Bhuj earthquake, many of the failures happened because of the issues with respect to your transverse reinforcement, which is ties or stirrups. So if your ties are not proper, then in that case, in case of seismic event, your structure will fail. Your ductility criteria will not be satisfied because of improper detailing. So this information generated from this equipment is useful also from the structural point of view. For example, if I want to upgrade some building, I have a 2-story building, I need to convert or I need to extend to 4-story. All these informations will be very important, that whether the reinforcement is as per drawing, number of bars, longitudinal bars in column is proper or not, whether the spacing of ties or stirrups is as per drawing or not, because all of those are critical from the structural safety point of view, apart from your durabilities related issues. Now there is one more equipment which you might have heard is rebound hammer test. So for this rebound hammer test also, we have IS 516 part 5 code, and this equipment, many times people think that it gives you the strength of the concrete. Okay, the thinking is correct, but question comes, how much accurate is this equipment? So accuracy of this equipment also needs to be checked. I will be discussing about the accuracy in the coming slides. So this equipment, rebound hammer test, is on the principle of surface hardness. So here, impact energy generated by a hammer is a very, very important. So anvil hardness, the anvil is the equipment on which we calibrate the rebound hammer. So a rebound hammer is always calibrated on an anvil with the Brinell hardness 500 Newton per mm square. And rebound hammer number is specified by the manufacturer. There are many manufacturers in this area, and we need to conduct the test on a dry surface. We should not conduct the test on a wet surface. A surface should be first cleaned by using some carborundum stone, and then we need to conduct the test in a grid of 300 mm center to center. Impact point, whenever we give using this hammer, we should be careful that it should not be near the edge. It should be at least 20 mm away from the edge. And rebound hammer should be kept normal to the surface of, or should be impacted normal to the surface, and 6 readings to be taken, and average of these readings will become rebound number. And corresponding to this rebound number, you have this correlation curve. Like if you see here, you have the rebound number values which you find out using the equipment, and then there is a compressive strength of concrete. So depending upon the angle of inclination, whether it's a 90 degree, it's a 45 degree, it's a 0 degree, it's a vertically upward, it's a vertically downward, you have to select the strength value from this curve. This curve is generally given by the manufacturer. But point is that this curve is maintained by the manufacturer on a particular set of material, particular type of aggregate, particular type of cement, etc. So if you want to have a more accurate assessment, there is a method given in IS 516 to calibrate the hammer in your lab itself. What is that method? You need to cast a cube of that particular grade of concrete which you are going to use in your structure at the mixed design stage itself. So we cast a cube of M25, M30 grade concrete. We place it in the CTM machine, compression testing machine, and we apply a load of 7 Newton per mm square, which is roughly 168, 16 ton load, something like that. And we, after 28 days, we impact the hammer on the cube surface from all the 4 faces, and we try to develop a relationship between a rebound hammer with respect to your compressive strength for your project, for that particular project. And in that case, the rebound hammer will be having a more accuracy as compared to using the manufacturer's test data on a manufacturer's curve, because many of these hammers are coming from international manufacturers, and those international manufacturers have a different set of materials, different set of environmental conditions when they are doing the calibration. So now our code, once it has been revised, where I am also the member, we have made sure that this should be calibrated for each and every major projects by this particular method in order to enhance the accuracy. So this method is giving only you indication of surface hardness, which is ultimately getting converted into a surface compressive strength. As per the code, the accuracy is plus minus 25%. That is why a specific calibration in our Indian scenario for a particular project will enhance the accuracy. This method should never be used for acceptance. People use this many times for acceptance. We have seen across the country in many cases. So the first line of code says this method should only be used for indication purpose. When we need to make a decision, we need to correlate with other tests like ultrasonic pulse velocity test or concrete core testing or concrete cube results data available at site. So this equipment one should be very careful while using in terms of its accuracy and its outcome. Now there is a semi-destructive method, like a doctor takes a blood sample from your body and he tries to find out various kinds of parameters. Similar to that, a core extraction and testing is a very important test, but it is exactly not non-destructive. Some kind of semi-destruction is there. So the code for this is IS 516 and IS 456. So we have a crack depth and propagation which can be ascertained using this. It can also give you the visual signs of concrete, strength and density, other mechanical parameters like modulus of elasticity, creep value, shrinkage, split tensile strength, and same concrete sample can be sent to a lab to find out the chemical parameters like chloride, sulfate, its pH value, which is important from the corrosion point of view, which I'll be talking in the coming slides. So this is important test. And this is how a concrete core sample looks. So again, the visual observation is coming into the play here. If you see the concrete core sample from a RCC structure of good quality, this is how it looks. It's well compacted, lesser voids, minimal voids. And if it is from some collapsed bridge pier, which is having a poor quality of concrete, you can see there is a voids, there is a delamination, separations of your concrete, and also the distribution of aggregate, color of concrete, etc. is not appropriate. So indicating that it's a poor quality concrete. A location and number of concrete cores, it depends upon the engineer in charge, whoever is executive engineer, or for that matter, in charge of that project. He decides the number of cores depending upon the number of members needs to be assessed. But in any case, the number of cores should not be less than 3. So this concrete core is basically a cylindrical. So we have a criteria for a diameter of core. So the criteria is that a concrete core should not be less than 3 times the maximum size of aggregate used. So if I am using a 20 mm aggregate, my dia of the core should not be less than 60 mm. But if it's a case of concrete pavement, it's better to go for a 100 mm dia core, because a diameter effect also comes. Now in latest code, we have also introduced the factor for a dia correction. It was earlier there in 1978 in SP24, but somehow since the SP24 was obsolete, it was not in use. So currently in the latest version, IS 516 2020, we have included the dia correction factor also, where about 3 to 6% is a strength enhancement depending upon your dia. So that code you can refer, IS 516, you will get much of the information. But in no case, dia shall be less than 2 times the maximum size of aggregate. And what is the acceptance criteria? That whatever the concrete cores we test, an individual equivalent cube strength. What is this individual equivalent cube strength or average equivalent cube strength? That I will explain in the next slide. But just to give you information, the average of 3 cores, that is average equivalent cube strength, shall not be less than 85%, and no individual core should have a strength less than 75% for a particular grade. If my grade is M25, that means my average value should not be less than 21.25 for M25, that is 25 MPa strength. If it's a case of individual core, it should not be less than 18.75. So it should be at least 75% of the grade of concrete. Now when we take a concrete core, it is cylindrical in nature, surface is uneven. So first of all, it should be properly cut and properly capped. So there is a procedure for cutting and capping is given in the code, how to do a proper cutting at 90 degree so the surface is smooth so that loading can be applied uniform. Now we have talked about the dia. What should be the length of the code? So code also specifies the length of the code, that length of the code to dia ratio should not be less than 1 and it should not be more than 2. So if my dia is 60 mm, my length should not be less than 60 mm. And my length should not be more than 120 mm. Because L by D less than 1, it will have a short column kind of failure. If my L by D is more than 2, it will be a buckling type failure. So that is why a L by D, that is a length to dia ratio of the concrete core specimen, should be kept between 1 to 2. So the core should be extracted in such a manner that this criteria is satisfied. And if my value is L by D 1, there is a correction factor given in code. So it is somewhere in the range of 0.89. And if my L by D is 2, the value is 1. So when we test a concrete core, we apply a L by D ratio correction factor. Then the next correction factor is a dia correction factor. Before that, just one point also I need to add here is that before testing, we keep a concrete cores which is extracted from site for about 48 hours in a water, so as to make in a saturated condition. We try to test a concrete core similar to what we test for concrete cube. So in a saturated surface saturated condition, so that it is a case of worst possible condition. So now we have applied all the factors. Still the question is that we have only a cylindrical strength, but all our codes are governed by a cube strength. Internationally, America, they use a cylindrical strength based design, but in India we use a concrete cube based design. So we need to convert a cylindrical strength to the cube strength. So we multiply by factor 1.25. So once we multiply by factor 1.25, our cylindrical strength gets converted into equivalent cube strength. But currently the Indian code IS 456-2000 is under revision. So we are working on the revision of that. And this correction factor of 1.25 is till now only valid for concrete grade up to M55. So once you move on from M55 to M100, these correction factors are different. We have done the testing in our lab and we have already submitted the data in Bureau of Indian Standard, which is already approved. So just to give you example, for M100 grade concrete, this correction factor will be 1.15. Because as the strength of concrete is increasing, concrete is becoming more brittle. And its stress strain curve will become more and more linear and steeper. So it will not be a parabolic like we see for a normal strength concrete, where we have a linear part and then we have some parabolic part, which is a plastic part. But for high strength concrete, we have only linear part. The difference between the strain at peak stress and the difference between a strain at an ultimate strain is 0. So that means it is completely brittle when we talk about M100. So this correction factor based on the studies for M100 will be 1.15. But up to M55, this factor is 1.25. And this is all to do with the end friction Platon effect. What will be the failure type of your cylinder as compared to cube, because that zone is 0.8. So 0.8 L is the effective length on which the failure happens. This is a practical things which you can study in the books. So it is there. So once we multiply 1.25, it gets converted into equivalent cube compressive strength. Similarly, there are various tests which you can conduct on the same course with respect to your Poisson's ratio, with respect to your tensile strength. So there are IS 516, there are 5 parts, there are up to 12 series where all the test methods related to your hardened concrete is given. Now, there is one more test which is there in our code, which is called as load test. If you see IS 456 2000, the load test is also recommended in case your concrete cores cubes all fail, before taking a final call about the safety of a structure. So in this test, we try to place the dial gauges at the locations which is suggested by the designer, where there is a possibility of maximum deflection. So we make a stable platform and we place a dial gauges according to our test setup, which is being suggested by a designer. And this is a procedure which is given in your IS 456 2000. That it should be subjected to a load of dead load plus 1.25 times the live load. And then we should apply that load in increments. We should never apply a load 100% in one go, because if a structure at the time of loading itself fails, there may be a possibility of injury or death to a person. So it should be always an incremental loading of 10%, 10% at a certain interval, making sure that no crack is visible on the bottom part of the slab, and there is a deflection which is becoming constant after some time for a particular loading. So by using the same principle, we apply 100% load and then we record the deflection. And if it is having a recovery, once we unload the slab, the load from the slab, if deflection recovery is 75%, then we say that our structure is safe. But if it is not getting a recovery in the tune of 75%, then we go for a repeat test after 72 hours. Same procedure we apply, and we try to see that whether this deflection recovery is 80% at least or not. This is one criteria. Second criteria is that if deflection is less than 40 L square by D, then the provision of recovery is not needed. This is for RCC. If you talk about pre-stressing, there the recovery is about 90%. So we have a different codes. If you talk about the load test on bridges, then for that we have a IRC codes in this area, IRC SP 47 and IRC 112. So there the load test procedures are referred to relevant codes. So there is a possibility of conducting a load test also when our concrete cube strength and concrete core test both fails. Now coming to one more test which is important, specifically in case of repair, which is a pull-off test. Now you may be hearing, you always hear that some kind of repair and rehabilitation work is going on in a particular structure. Now the most important aspect of any repair is that the repair should be sound. So how to check the soundness and quality of repair is by trying to find out what is the bond between your old concrete and new concrete. Because if there is some kind of problem with cover concrete like carbonation, which is now I'm going to talk after this slide, so you remove that part and you get replaced that particular portion with a newer concrete. So bond between the old and the new concrete is very, very critical when we go for repair. So we have a equipment to determine the bond between the old concrete and new concrete. That is a pull-off test. So we make a surface. So surface planning is there. So we make a surface smooth. We attach a disc to the core, and then we do a partial coring of about 25 mm, and then we attach a loading frame and we try to pull. If you see in terms of figure, if this is a surface and this is a parent concrete or an old concrete, this is a new concrete, and then this is epoxy by which we place this disc by using a partial coring. This depth is about 25 mm. This is if you take a case of a slab, or if it's a case of a beam, and then we try to pull using a dynameter, and then we find out that from which location my failure is happening. Calculations are of course there by this equation, but the main fundamental is that if my failure is happening in substrate or from parent concrete, it indicates that my repair is perfectly all right, it is sound, because the strength of a repair mortar is more than my concrete, then only failure is happening in a parent concrete. If the failure is happening at the bond between the old concrete and new concrete, that means my bonding agent is not proper. There are many types of bonding agents are available, which are epoxy based or SBR latex based. So again, that is the other area. Due to limitation of time, we may not be able to discuss in detail. So, and if failure is from the repair material itself, that means your repair material itself is not having a sufficient strength. So out of these, this is the failure mode where the failure from substrate happens, is the failure mode which we should always try to achieve during the repair. Otherwise, these two failure modes indicates that your repair is ineffective. And this is how the equipment looks. First we do a coring, then we place that disc which I have shown, and then we try to pull it by using this equipment, which is also known as dynameter. And then we see that whether the failure is happening from the bond, or it is happening from the substrate, or it is happening from the bond. And this is the equation to calculate the bond strength. So if your bond strength is greater than 1, we feel that it is all right, provided my failure is happening from the substrate. Now coming to the last part of this talk, which is very important, corrosion. Now, all of you know corrosion of steel is inevitable. So over a period of time, corrosion will happen. But what is our aim? Our aim is that corrosion should not happen during the service life of a structure. So iron is unstable state at room temperature, and it has a tendency to get converted into the rust. In dry air, if it is having a dry conditions, this conversion of iron oxide to rust is very slow. But if it is a case of presence of water and oxygen, the rate is very, very fast. So steel reinforcement generally happens because of two reasons. If somebody asks you why this corrosion is happening in case of steel, this corrosion is happening in case of steel because of two basic phenomena. The first one is the carbonation induced corrosion, and second one is the chloride induced corrosion. Now, why this is important? Because once we know the mechanism, then only we will be able to select the equipment. We will be able to conduct the relevant tests. So carbonation induced corrosion generally happen in the areas where the humidity is about 50 to 75. And it basically happens in the part of India which is in the semi-arid or a dry region, like Delhi, Rajasthan, Jaipur, this Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, etc. The dry regions of the country are more susceptible to carbonation-induced corrosion. But if you talk about the chloride-induced corrosion, it happens near the seabed. Talk about Bhavnagar, the structures which are in coastal regions. Talk about Diu, talk about Surat, Bombay, Chennai, all those structures which are on coastal belt, they are prone to chloride-induced corrosion. So let's talk about first mechanism, carbonation. So what the carbonation does? This carbonation basically decreases the pH of the concrete. How? Once generally during the heat of hydration process, a calcium hydroxide gel, which is also known as Portlandite, is formed. So when calcium hydroxide is present in your concrete system, and if there is a porosity or some kind of, you can say, a voids inside your cover concrete, the carbon dioxide will ingress from the atmosphere and it will try to convert calcium hydroxide into the calcium carbonate. Now this calcium carbonate is a product, and this mechanism is carbonation. Once this calcium carbonate is formed, pH of concrete will be reducing. That means a good quality concrete, which is supposed to have a alkalinity of about 12.5, will start to decrease in the pH, and this pH from 12.5 to try to move towards 9, 9.5, 10. So once this pH is getting reduced, a passive film around your reinforcement, so alkalinity which is existing around your reinforcement will be lost. And once this alkalinity is lost, then there will be a movement of ions, that is a cathodic and anodic. If you see a Fe, which is iron having +2 valency, oxygen having -2 valency. So one will be acting as cathode, other will be acting as anode. So once the breakage of this passive film happens, then there will be a movement of ions, then there will be an ingress of moisture and water, and then the formation of your rust will be there. Similarly, if it's a case of chloride ions, through your pores or voids, this chloride ions will enter and it will break down the film, and then corrosion process will start. So depending upon the location in which the structure is situated, environmental condition is very, very important. Again, just I would like to add here is that once the carbonation happens, it not necessarily means that corrosion will happen. To happen the corrosion, after carbonation, you need certain amount of moisture, you need certain amount of humidity. So at humidity level of 50 to 75, carbonation will happen, but corrosion will not happen. So corrosion will start in the humidity levels of 95 to 100, where there is a moisture and humidity in that range. After your carbonation has reached your rebar level and your humidity is in the range of 95 and there is an ingress of moisture and water, then the corrosion will start. So we need to understand the complete mechanism, then only we will be able to interpret the data. So this is a typical reactions which take place during the reinforcement corrosion. So it's a chemistry part of this. Due to shortage of time, I am not going into detail, but just to add here, whatever is the rust which is going to form because of this corrosion mechanism, the volume of this rust is about 6 to 8 times the actual amount of steel which is undergone the corrosion. So once this volume is 8 times, it is bound to impart a pressure on the surface of concrete. And once the pressure is coming on surface of concrete, it will be creating a spalling of concrete, and that is how a spalling of reinforcement happens. So we have a different methods which is used for corrosion evaluation, like loss of passive film. We conduct a depth of carbonation method and chloride ion content. We have a NDT method for assessing the carbonation, that is a likelihood of carbonation, that is Harshell potential method. Then to find out the corrosion rate, we go for electrical resistivity of concrete, and the last one is a corrosion rate. We have a Galois pulse, that is on the principle of polarization resistance method. And then there are various methods with respect to chloride ion content determinations. So we have a acid soluble chloride, water soluble chloride. So I'm not going into much detail of this. Now coming to how to determine the chloride content at site. So we have an equipment called as rapid chloride test kit. So we try to extract the concrete powder at site, and then we use the calibrated solutions provided by the manufacturers, and by using their curve, which is the risk curve between the chloride per concrete mass potentiometric titration versus chloride per concrete mass, and we try to find out the chloride content in hardened concrete. So chloride content in hardened concrete we try to determine, and if you see our code, it states that a chloride content in hardened concrete should not be more than 0.6 kg per meter cube if it's a RCC. So when a reinforced concrete construction is the case, it should be lower than 0.6 kg per meter cube. If it is more than that, it simply indicates that the water which is used for construction was containing high amount of chloride, or the structure is in a situation in area where there is a seesaw. So we always should be careful with the construction water quality because it is going to affect the corrosion process in your structure. It is very difficult to control a chloride content which is inside your member. So that is why internal chloride, when we see which is higher than 0.6 kg per meter cube, it is very difficult to do a repair because internationally they go for this chloride extraction techniques, which is chloride extraction and removal, which is very, very difficult. So other than NDT, once you are going to work in future at construction site, be careful with the construction water because most of the time construction water is a culprit which hampers the durability of structures. So carbonations, as I have told you, it breaks down the alkalinity and drops the pH. But there are methods to control the carbonation. How? By increasing the water cement ratio, that is by enhancing the grade. Water cement ratio will decrease, strength will increase, pores will decrease, impermeability will be there, your permeability will decrease. Second is curing is very, very important. If you want to improve your concrete quality, because a rate of carbonation is also interlinked with your curing. Types of cementitious material. For example, ordinary Portland cement will have a different carbonation rate as compared to your Portland pozzolana cement. Because when you add Portland pozzolana cement, it contains fly ash. And when there is a fly ash, there is always a secondary heat of hydration, and there is a possibility of a somewhat higher carbonation rate in case of fly ash concrete. So there you need to be careful with respect to extra curing, slightly higher grade of concrete, or using some other binders which can nullify the effect of your higher carbonation rate when it comes to a fly ash concrete. So there are methods to control carbonation rate also. And moisture content of concrete, as I have told you, is a important part, and humidity between 50 to 75% is you can say a bandwidth under which this carbonation happens. How to check the carbonation? Simply, it's a simple test. You need to extract the concrete sample. It should be a fresh concrete sample from a hardened concrete. So, and you have to spray a phenolphthalein indicator. Once you spray the phenolphthalein indicator, it will turn into either pink color or it will turn to the color of the same color that of the concrete. So if it turns into the pink color, it simply indicates that your concrete is uncarbonated in a pink part. But the areas where the concrete is of the same color that of your actual concrete, this portion is your carbonated part. This is a typical case of carbonation test on RCC slab, where we drill some concrete course, we spray phenolphthalein indicator, and we measure at 4 locations. Then we have a chloride diffusion tests. There are different procedures like ASTM C1543. It talks about the ponding of chloride solution. This is not exactly a non-destructive test, but many times when we go for lab test, we use certain methods like NT-Build 443 or NT-Build 492 or ASTM C1202. These tests are many times done as a part of laboratory investigations in case of dams or structures which are in close contact with sea. So procedures I am not going to discuss due to paucity of time, but you can refer these codes, and these codes have a different way of determining the chloride diffusion coefficient. There is a fixed law by which you can find out the chloride diffusion. This is a typical equation where you need to find out what is the surface chloride content, then what is the initial chloride content, exposure time is important, and apparent chloride diffusion coefficient. So this is a mathematical part of this. And then you plot a curve with respect to your concrete cover depth. So it's very important to determine the chloride profile. If once you know the chloride profile, then only you will be able to find out that what is the chloride on the surface of your concrete member Then what is the chloride after 5 mm, after 10 mm, and what is the chloride at reinforcement level? The most important thing is that chloride at reinforcement level is critical. And again, whenever the cracking happens because of your corrosion, there are two different things. There is a 2T model. If you Google it and refer later on, there is a 2T model which talks about the corrosion initiation, and the second part is corrosion propagation. So both initiation and propagation are important. Whatever we are talking is related to initiation, but understanding of propagation part is very, very important in order to determine the service life of your structure. So again, there is a method, anti-build. You can follow the procedure given in the code. I'm not going to detail. We conduct a test and then we try to split that member and we find out what is the chloride ion penetration in this particular case. And in this different test with respect to site conditions, as I have explained you, is simply taking powder by using this equipment, and we collect the sample in this bag, and then by using the calibrated solution, we try to find out chloride depth at different levels, like what is the depth on the surface, what is depth on the 5 mm, 10 mm, 15 mm, and so on. Now coming to, if there is a corrosion, how to conduct the non-destructive test. So non-destructive test basically for finding out the likelihood of corrosion is half cell potential method as per ASTM C876. So when any bar is corroding, there is always a potential difference created and there is a potential field. So we try to measure potential difference by an equipment known as half cell potential. So how this works, there is a copper sulfate solution, there is a porous plug, sponge, etc. And we measure the potential difference between the concrete and the steel in this region. And we have a copper sulfate half cell solution, there is a voltmeter, and once we measure the potential difference between the reinforcement and the concrete in this particular region, there is a ASTM C876 standard which gives you the likelihood of corrosion. Again, this test is not conclusive, it is only indicative. If your value is more positive than minus 200 millivolt, it indicates there is a corrosion unlikely to take place. If it is more negative than minus 350 millivolt, there is a possibility of corrosion. If it is value is coming between minus 200 to minus 350 millivolt, we are not sure. That is why in the beginning of the talk I told you that we need to go for combination of tests. Like we need to take the support of lab test methods also along with NDT test methods. We have different types of solutions also apart from copper sulfate, that is a silver chloride solutions are also used. And now we have an Indian standard also recently, you can say published by BIS on half cell potential method. It is IS 516 part 5. I hope it's in part 5, it's section 4. And then once we find out half cell potential values, we try to plot against the corrosion rate. So again, then there is one more method which talks about the concrete resistivity. This is also a non-destructive test method. It is on the basis of 4-probe method by Wiener. So Wiener was a scientist who have developed this method. And here we have 4 probes. So it's on the principle of resistivity. In simple terms, if your concrete is more compact, more dense, more sound, its resistivity value will be high. And if your concrete is having porosity, voids, your resistivity value will be low. So simply we use this equipment where 4 probes are placed. Then we have a voltmeter, then we have an ammeter, and we record the data. And on the basis of data, there is a BS standard, BS 881, where you can refer the guidelines is given. Also, the manufacturers provide the guidelines that if your resistivity is greater than 12 kilo ohm centimeter, when it is more than 12 kilo ohm centimeter, it indicates its resistivity is high, likelihood of corrosion or a possibility of corrosion is lower. If value is on the lower side, if your resistivity is on the lower side, it basically indicates that there is a problem with respect to durability. There will be a possibility of this corrosion in future. So there is a one method, half cell. Second one is resistivity. Third method is air permeability. So resistivity method is good when your concrete is slightly moist. Similar is the case with your half cell potential method, that whenever you conduct a test, you need to saturate the surface 24 hours prior to conducting a test. Try to sprinkle the water and make it in a possible saturated condition. But the third test is an air permeability test, which is for a dry concrete. So there is a vacuum cell. It is manufactured by Professor Torrent, where we try to find out the quality of cover concrete. I'm not covering here because of lesser time, but just to give you information, we can also check a quality of a dry concrete by using an equipment developed by Professor Torrent of air permeability tester is the name of that particular equipment. Now, as I have told you, all these equipments are giving only some kind of indication. And as a civil engineer, our more interest is what is the rate of corrosion? How much quantity of steel I am going to lose every year, and that will be coming from the rate of corrosion. So we have a different methods like polarization resistance. So half cell potential provides information on likelihood. Resistivity is a combination of half cell and it provides a qualitative indications. Both these two tests are giving a qualitative information. There is no quantification. Now polarization resistance provides the measurement of corrosion current, which is far more relevant to us engineer when it talks about in terms of quantification. So there is a galvanic pulse method where we apply a constant current pulse. Then we monitor potential change of that electrode, and from recorded voltage history, we evaluate the polarization resistance. Here we use corrosion rate equations developed by Stern-Gregory and also the Faraday laws, and we try to work out what is the amount of steel lost in mm per year. So that is a good indicator when we talk about how this service life of a structure. So once we know the amount of steel which is going to be lost in mm per year, that means we know the rate. So once we know the rate, we will be able to find out a service life of a structure, how much further life is remaining. In terms of repair, if the reinforcement dia, if it is reduced by 10 mm, in our general practice, we completely try to add the same dia reinforcement in the member. Because if it is more than 10 mm decrease, we generally feel that the structure will be unsafe and we try to go for jacketing, etc. So this equipment is more important, which is called as Galva pulse. It is the integrated unit consisting of half cell potential, resistance, not exactly the resistivity, and polarization resistance. And then we have a software for this data analysis and etc., where you can also display a data in the different forms. So this equipment is more, you can say, a quantification based rather than half cell and different equipments, which I have discussed in the previous slides. The last slide is on how to evaluate the concrete cylinders taken from dams in terms of your, you can say, permeability class or chloride ion penetration class. So we have a ASTM standards. This test we can conduct in lab also, and this test we can conduct on a concrete core samples which are extracted from different sites, where we prepare a specimen of 100 mm dia and 50 mm thick, and we try to place in between sodium chloride and sodium hydroxide solution, and we pass the ions, and then we measure the current for 6 hours, and then we compute the total charge. And this is the criteria which is given in ASTM C1202. Currently we have only ASTM standard. Indian standard currently is under the formulation stage. So we also will be having our own standard very soon. So this standard talks, if the value is greater than 4000, chloride ion penetration is high. If it is less than 100, negligible. If it is 1000 to 2000, low. So according to this, the classification is there. So more, you can say, impermeable is your concrete, lesser will be your this chloride ion penetration. So I think I have taken more time than what was allotted to me. But still, if somebody has a question, I would be happy to answer that. Professor Solanki?
Yes, sir. Sir, it's a really very nice presentation, and I welcome all the question from the participant. But I request them to please email me or send me a WhatsApp, because we have out of time and we have the next lecture session, sir. So if any question, if I receive from the participant, I definitely will send to you, and we will give that answer to the participant. So now I request to the Professor Abhis Pandya to say a word of thanks.
Good afternoon, all. It was a marathon talk by Brijesh, and due to this our time constraint, as we are supposed to start the lectures from 1:15, we have to cut short, and we have to skip the question answer session. But definitely you post your questions, and we'll try to get your answers from Mr. Brijesh Singh. Brijesh, thank you very much for your time. We know that you are a busy person, but we know that you have affection towards college, and you have shared your valuable knowledge with us. Thank you very much, and let us hope that we can arrange some other lecture with you, and if possible, we may invite you in person to the college as well. So, thanking you on behalf of Applied Mechanics Department and the college. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Sorry, due to shortage of time, I have not covered in detail, but definitely I would like to come to a college and have this talk in detail also. So thank you so much, Pandya Sahab. So much. Thank you so much.
All the participants, I will send an email for the feedback form. So I request you that you all please fill that feedback form, so that we will improve this webinar series. And thanking you once again, and let's conclude this today's session. Thank you all the participants, principal sir, and thank you very much, Brijesh Singh sir.
Thank you. Thank
again,
you.
thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me conclude this one.